guys, I am very excited to introduce our first guest on Why Writing Matters, my generous and wonderful kind friend, Ann Leamon. So I'm going to read you just quickly her short bio, and then I'm going to show you just the website for her company, and then we'll get into the interview. Ann Leamon, COO and Partner, co-founded Bella and started managing its day-to-day operations after spending a dozen years at Harvard Business School. Ann worked as a teaching fellow with Josh Lerner at HBS and also handled corporate communications for Bessemer Venture Partners, a top-tier global growth equity and venture capital investor. Prior to joining HBS, she spent 9 years in the retail and electric utility industries. While at Harvard Business School, Ann co-founded and managed the Center for Case Development. She left that position to collaborate with Professor Lerner and Dr. Felda Hardymon in the further development of the Venture Capital and Private Equity course. She has authored more than 120 cases and co-authored 3 editions of Venture Capital and Private Equity, a casebook, and the textbook, Venture Capital, Private Equity, and the Financing of Entrepreneurship. Ann holds a bachelor's honors in German from the University of King's College, an MA in economics from the University of Montana, where she studied urban redevelopment, and an MFA from Bennington Writing Seminars, which is where Miss Rolfe met her. That is a quick little background on Ann, and I hope you enjoy the interview. She had a lot of great things to say. First question is just tell me your name and like what you do and all that good stuff.
My name is Ann Leamon. I run a boutique consulting firm that focuses on private equity, venture capital, and economic policy analysis.
Okay, so could you tell me a little bit about your path to get to this career? How it all came about?
Well, let's see. When I was 11, somebody said to me, "You should be a writer when you grow up." And I promptly discounted that. And I did various things. I got a master's degree in economics from University of Montana because it was better than waitressing tables. And I felt here I had this master's degree and I should do something with it. So I went and worked for a power company, and then I worked for LL Bean, the retailer, and ended up at Bean doing work in corporate strategy, which had a lot of writing. And I remember at one point looking out the window and thinking, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. I was doing competitive analysis where you researched what the competitors were doing and you wrote that up in a newsletter. And I mean, it wasn't going to be Nobel Prize winning literature, but it was just so interesting to me. Left Bean, ended up at Harvard Business School writing business school cases, which are like 15-page descriptions of a problem that a protagonist has. So in a way, it's a short story. There's a mystery. Is this person going to raise the cost of their product, or are they going to package it in smaller sizes? And you provide all the background for that the decision maker at the time had. So you can see where the company is in the constellation of competitors and so forth, what the demand is for the product, and so on. And then the piece itself ends up being discussed in class with 90 people, and they decide what they think that the protagonist should have done. Then usually the protagonist is there and the protagonist tells you what they've done. I did that for 12 years. I was also, for 10 of those years, the corporate communications director for a venture capital investment firm, where I got to sit in their weekly meetings and learn all about the really cool companies that they were investing in. If you've used Yelp or LinkedIn, this company was a major investor for them. Skype, what are some of the others? Oh, some of the space-oriented companies, the Google satellite company that they invested in. So I was part-time studying venture capital and private equity from an academic perspective. How are the firms dealing with this and such a problem? And part-time doing it on a real applied perspective, how these guys think about these problems. Most of them were men at the time. There are now some women. And writing up the quarterly reports, writing up material they want on the website, and so forth. And after about 12 years of venture capital with Harvard and venture capital with the venture capital firm, during which time I went to Bennington and got my MFA in poetry, I started a company, co-founded a company with the professor I was working with at Harvard, this one, Bella, Private Markets, that I work for now. And we've done work for everybody from the government of Russia, back before Russia started doing very wicked things, to some of the Canadians, some of a group down in Colombia. So I've gotten to travel a lot, and I've also gotten to write about it. It's a little bit like the old slogan of the Navy, to meet interesting people and travel the world and meet interesting people. Here I got to travel the world, meet interesting people, and write things about them, which was really neat.
So what exactly, in as simple terms as possible that teenagers might understand, what does your company do?
We organize webinar right now. We organize classes that train investors on how to think about investment. We train people, big investors like pension funds, like Texas teachers.
Mm-hmm.
We might teach them about different aspects of private equity, which is when you buy shares in a company that's not listed on the stock exchange. So it just is a different way of thinking about a company and thinking about your investment and what you expect to get back from it. Right now, we're doing a lot of work on diversity, the diversity in private equity firms. So these firms that are making the investments, how diverse are they? And how is there difference in the performance between the different ethnicities, the Asians, Hispanics, Black owned firms, and the non-minority owned firms, which basically are owned by white guys. So we started doing that in 2018, and we've done a couple of updates of that work. We're also now slicing it more finely, so not just minority versus non-minority, but now we're getting into the more ethnicity focused stuff. We're working with some investment firms to look at whether, while they've been invested in a company, the company's workforce has become more diverse. So they've just started doing this analysis, and they're very focused on it, very excited about it, and aware that they probably are not going to see what they'd like to see, which is diversity increased, but it gives them a baseline that they can work from to try to improve their diversity scores.
Okay. So the goal is to make the companies more diverse?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
By providing them information on their current state and how it may have evolved over time.
It's really interesting. Okay, so I want to talk specifically about what role does writing play? You have a long career of writing. What role, and I think you work in an industry where I know my students probably don't think that writing is heavily involved in this. So I want you to explain a little bit now about the role that writing plays in your work.
I write all the time. Today we've had problems getting an invoice paid by a customer. And they said, well, you don't have a purchase order. I said, well, here's why we don't have a purchase order. And I explained very carefully why we don't have a purchase order. And the next thing I knew, they said, oh, I guess we'd better give you a purchase order. So then they gave us a purchase order. We're going to get paid. So that's 2 paragraphs. And then a 150 slide deck I was reviewing, where we were recounting the results of our study on diversity in private equity firms. There it was, do we have subject-verb agreement? Is this sentence clear? Does this section match what we're saying that it says, that the numbers that are coming up? Because I work with a bunch of very smart math analytic guys. But sometimes they just stick something into a slide deck, and it takes me to come through and read it and say, wait a minute, this isn't saying this. This doesn't match. Oh, sorry, guess we copied something over wrong. So that's very high level writing to make sure that it's making sense. I've just finished writing a newsletter piece for State Street. When it comes out, I'll send it to you, about a certain way that firms can provide funding for their investments, and the impact that has on how the firms can report their, how the firms can report their earnings and their performance. So it has meant doing a huge amount of research and reading a whole number of academic articles, and then translating what they're saying in a way that is accurate, but also accessible to smart people who are not economists.
Awesome.
So, and let me show you. Here it is. I knew it was readily accessible. And then I wrote this.
Oh, wow. Nice.
It is not going to be a movie made anytime soon, starring anybody you've ever heard of, but it was, that's sort of the writing part of my work taken to its, absolute extreme.
All right. So that brings me, a lot of the stuff that you mentioned in describing the writing part brings me to my next question. My students hate to read. They hate it. They don't understand why reading is important. And they don't understand why, specifically close reading. Like, why do I have to annotate? And I'm not like super annoying about annotating. I do a pretty simple, and I know that like it's really hard to get teenagers to understand that when we are reading a piece of literature that's, meant the purpose is to entertain, and I'm having them look at literary devices, they don't understand how those skills will translate into anything practical. Because they're like, well, I'm not going to be a literature professor. Good, there are too many in the world. We don't need any more. We don't need any more poets either.
Right.
I got to be honest. Like, there's so many of us. So you mentioned researching and then using that in like stuff. So could you tell me about how reading plays a role in your work and being able to read closely?
Oh, it's huge. For instance, in an academic article that I might have to review and then distill, you need to be able to understand, are they saying that something happens all the time or just occasionally? Are they saying that something causes a result or simply is associated with it? Those are 2 things that you find frequently in economic type literature. But just in terms of every day, we just had to let somebody go. And part of the reason we let her go was that we would write her an email and say, here are these 4 things to do. And then, oh yes, I just remembered, here's something else. She would not read to the end of the email. if you told her, do it this way, this way, this way, she might get 2 out of the 3, but she would not read closely and understand what was demanded of her. We just couldn't do it. You know, we
Yeah.
needed that attention to detail, that close reading. So read closely. It may save your job.
Yeah. My students don't ever read to the, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm making these videos for students I haven't met yet. So I am confident that my new students coming in will not make these mistakes. But I do tell them, like, you can get fired for not being able to read or write properly.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thing. That is very helpful. So I would like to ask you, how did you learn to be a good reader and writer? Because you are a phenomenal reader and writer, like really high level. I know, because we went to grad school together. And so how did you learn?
I grew up with books. I grew up with a family that cared about books and ideas. And I had a tremendous high school English teacher who, yeah, I mean, the amount of red fine point Bic ink that he spilled over my, of course, handwritten at the time,
Mm-hmm.
essays was unfathomable. I'm sure it was gallons. And because when I started high school, I felt the more words you use and the bigger words you use, the smarter you sounded.
Mm.
And I learned that no, the more precise you thought, so they go side by side. You have to write carefully and you have to think carefully. And I find if somebody doesn't do one, they're unlikely, it's harder to discern that they can do the other. I'm
Right.
not saying that they can't, because I know some people who are just fabulous, very careful thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
but writing is simply not their forte. But by and large, the two of them go together. And it was Mr. Hiss at my high school who taught me how to write. And I gave him a copy of my book and signed it to Mr. Hiss, it's all your fault. But that's it, you know, just that kind of making sure you're saying what you mean and meaning what you say and saying it as precisely as possible.
Yeah.
Came from him.
I always say, like, when I'm teaching writing, like, the hardest part is I can't teach you to think.
Right.
And like that, I mean, you can foster thinking, right, by exposing students to like perspectives and reading things, but like it's really hard, like, to, because you know, in Texas, 10th grade is the persuasive essay. That's the standardized test essay, and we do other types of essays, but honestly, in my classes, that's our big push. And part of the issue with their essays is the thinking. It's not the actual writing. It's that they had a thought that was illogical and then their whole essay fell apart. And I don't really, parents ask me like, how can my students write better essays? And I was like, I don't know, argue with them at home. Like, I don't really know the answer to clear thinking.
You know, certainly you're right. Reading also.
Yeah, reading.
You know, ask them to cite their sources, ask them where did that thought come from. But for instance, I mean, E.B. White, you know, Philip Lope, any of the essays, Donald Hall,
Mm-hmm.
just to see how they get from their start to their end.
Mm-hmm.
The Economist newspaper, news magazine,
Yeah.
they're, you know.
That'll be a tough sell for my students, but yeah, I
Well,
love the
but
Economist.
they have some, if you just take an article or two out of it,
Yeah.
don't give them the name. I became an economist because I loved the news magazine so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really figured out, talk about not doing close reading. Oh, wait a minute. It's called The Economist but it's written by journalists.
Mhm.
So if I'd thought that through, I would have probably ended up as a journalist and I'd be out of a job now. So I guess it all turned out okay.
It turned out fine. I think that the money in your industry is a little better than journalism right now.
There is that.
As someone who, not to disparage journalism, love it, was a journalism major, which is where I really learned to be concise, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I went to journalism. I did journalism in high school too. So my high school journalism teacher was helpful with that. But like, she gave us a copy of William Zinzer's On Writing Well in high school. And, or I think I got it in high school for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And that book changed my life, writing wise. And also you mentioned E.B. White, and E.B. White is like Stunk and White, the Elements style.
Yes, Stunk and White, yep.
Stunk and White. But E.B. White is all over On Writing Well. Zinzer like quotes, like uses examples. So cool. Okay, so my last question for you is, what is the best writing advice you've ever been given or that you have?
Write lousy first drafts. Anything you have written down, you can improve, but the most brilliant thing that's in your head, you can never either see or improve that.
So drafting, like just get it out there.
Just get it out.
Yeah, I have a lot of kids who get paralyzed. And that's why I use an exercise in class called the 11-minute essay, where I have them go through the whole, I didn't invent it. This woman, this brilliant teacher of writing, Gretchen Burnaby, came up with it. But, and it's an entire essay in 11 minutes. And my students are like, I can't do it. I was like, you just got to like, let it flow, get it out the first time and then go back. But, drafting is almost a lost art at this point. I mean, I make them do draft. Like I have to force my students to do multiple draft things.
Wow. I mean,
we got to require it.
Alice gave me another exercise that I love, which is open the dictionary, put your finger on a word, and you have to write 3 pages that involve that word. I mean, that word has to be in it.
Wow, it's almost like, that makes me think of the Billy Collins poem, The Lanyard.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, did he do that exercise?
Yep.
Also, I love that poem, and when I teach it in creative writing, I use it in creative writing, and I always say that if he had brought that poem to a workshop, what do you think the workshop would have done to that poem, Ann? Have you read it?
Yeah.
What do you think they would have done?
I think they probably would have cut it out. They would have
cut that beautiful opening. I know that if a student had handed me that poem, I'd be like, why is this here? Get that. You're putting your way into the poem. And that would upset me because I love the beautiful, it's beautiful. Like it needs to be there and it's wonderful. Anywho, well, thank you. This has been extremely interesting and helpful. And I think my students are going to be like kind of blown away by the amount of writing in your industry. So thank you so much.
It's huge. And if anybody wants to talk to me, I'm happy to be talked to.
Awesome.